Hi all, I hope you're well. So today I'm going to be discussing the UK House Price Index for Scotland and the update for February 2025. This is something that I do on a monthly basis, and it's really giving you good insight as to what's happening in the Scottish property market. But primarily for our viewers who are interested in Fife, Dundee, Edinburgh and Glasgow, it gives you really great insight, as I say, into what potentially is happening and how it may be impacting you, and what is your property value and how frequently are things selling, and when is the right time to do that? So again, it just gives you really good insight. So what I'm going to look at is the economic statement that has been issued by the UK House Price Index, and that will give us a real good understanding of where things are in the market at the moment. So total transaction volumes is something that we really base the health of the market on. New build volumes are available as well, and what that shows us is HM Land Registry, they basically process over 40% of property values in this point and what transacted at this stage. And that can change as we look at the picture moving forward, because Land Registry can sometimes be about 3 months behind, which is why we're covering February rather than obviously March. So it's something for you to be looking out for. It looks at historical data, it gives you good awareness, and also, as I say, it does do a bit of a revision there as well. So it gives you further information is available on the HM Land Registry, and also the UK House Price Index article link is in this post. So again, if you're interested, you can click on this afterwards. And again, if you've got any questions after you've done that, then feel free to message me here directly. I'm always happy to help. So what we're going to look at is some of the average house prices. We're going to look at what type of property is selling. We're going to look at the transactions, which gives you good insight to the health of the market. But one of the things I really want to speak about as well, which all of us have been watching, I'm sure, when we've seen the news, is a bit of a turbulent time, isn't it, with regards to what Trump is doing with the economy and how has that impacted. And one of the statements that came out after the inflation rates were announced at 2.6%. I'm just going to read that statement to you, and I'll give you a bit of a feel for what people are thinking in the financial sectors at the moment. So after a stretch of economic unease, the UK inflation has continued its downward trajectory, which is positive. This Consumer Price Index, CPI, shows it falling to 2.6 in the year ending March. So according to latest statistics, this marks the second consecutive monthly decline and comes in lower than market actually had anticipated or expected, which is a welcome development for households and also policymakers, and by policymakers, I'm talking about Bank of England, because if Bank of England react to this and potentially lower interest rates, then that makes things a lot easier for everyone in regards to properties and savings, etc. So according to the Office of National Statistics, the largest downward pressure on inflation came from recreation and culture, alongside lower motor fuel prices. These helped offset persistent strength in services of inflation, and which remains inflated compared to pre-pandemic norms. So it's still quite an inflated number. But while the headline figure may offer a moment of relief, the financial experts are urging advisors to keep a very close eye on what is going to happen ahead. So April brought a wave of price hikes. Everyone's experiencing that, from energy bills going up to council tax. These won't be captured in this latest statement because this was just for March. But meanwhile, global uncertainties, including the potential for further trade disruption, we've seen what Donald Trump is doing there. They've driven US tariffs and make a big difference there as well. And that continues to cast a long-term shadow over the inflation outlook. So markets have begun pricing in a rate cut, potentially from the Bank of England as early as May, depending on how this flows. And many believe monetary easing will follow throughout the year. Concerns still remain, though. How far will this inflation drop? Will it continue to do so, or is this a very short-term thing? And what they're doing is preemptively advising us to wait and get further clarity and see what happens with the Bank of England. So that'll be something for us to look at and see what they're going to do potentially, if anything at all. They may do something, they may not do anything, but we'll wait and see. But as far as the UK House Price Index goes, what we're going to look at, as I said, is the average house price. So the average house price in Scotland has increased by 5.7% in the 12 months to February 2025. And the average price at the moment is £186,000. So really affordable housing. If we look at Fife in particular, say, the average salary in Fife is around about 33,000. So if we look at generally 6 times salaries on 33,000, that's giving us over £200,000. So the average price is at 186. So that makes property really affordable in this location. This was up as well. This was an increase to 5.7% from 5.3%, which was the revised number expected at the end of January, and was higher than the average UK house price. The average UK house price inflation on property is 5.4. In Scotland, it's 5.7. So that's a really strong position for Scottish prices and affordable, as I say. On a non-seasonally adjusted, now what do we mean by that? Basically, property sales are working a month behind, sometimes as much as 3 months behind. So what the Land Registry does is they predict what they think it will look like, and then as the actual figures come through, they will do an adjustment to that, and that's what we call seasonally adjusted. So it makes a big difference to us in regards to what potentially the property will look like in regards to going forward and the true reflection of value and increase. So something for you to keep an eye on. If we look at the provisionals for December 23, they were looking at December 24 pricing as well, and that was like 4.4%. So again, the expectation of what was going to happen has shown that actually it's a more positive position. We've definitely seen that actually as agents. We've seen that there's more property coming to market, there's more sales occurring as well. And the market definitely seems to be improving. I think people are getting a bit of confidence, but it'll be interesting to see, as I say, when we talked about the inflation rates coming down, what that really look like for us in real terms in regards to monetary and confidence that we may feel to potentially sell our properties and get ourselves on the market as well as a first-time buyer. So definitely something to be looking at. Again, comparing that, if we look at the types of properties that are selling, we have got, in Scotland, terrace houses had the highest annual percentage increase, and they increased by 7.4% in the 12 months to February 25. So the average terrace property at the moment is selling at £171,000. And that's really great. If you're sitting at the moment, you're in a terrace property, you perhaps don't know how much it's worth, it gives you a good indicator as to potentially what value you have in the home that you have. And may help you make some decisions on what you're doing with your life as well, because everything changes, doesn't it? So that's where you are for your terrace. If we look at apartments and masonettes, they had the lowest annual percentage change, but it still was an increase. It still increased by 3.5% in the 12 months to February. So the average price for an apartment or masonette is 131,000. So again, when I mentioned earlier on about the 6 times salaries at 200,000, and then you're saying you can get basically a terrace property for 171, you can get an apartment or masonette for 130. That makes it really affordable to live in Scotland at the moment. In Scotland, 28 of 32 local authority areas showed an increase in their average house prices in the 12 months up to February as well. So again, that's across the board that's happening. That's a really strong position to be in, isn't it? You will have exclusions, of course you will. And those are ones where actually probably it's because they can't make a decision on whether it's improved or not, because the properties that are selling, the transactions, the number of houses that are on the market and selling are low. So if you look at, for instance, the Orkney Islands, there's obviously volatility there. There's low volumes, there's low stock, so you can't really get a good fare for that. So it tends to take out some of the island areas to make it an easier understanding of price. But the highest annual percentage change was in East Renfrewshire, where average house prices increased by 10.6% in the 12 months to February to 291,000. And again, that's excluding some of the small island areas around there. But that's a huge jump, isn't it? 10% increase in a 12-month window. So definitely, if you're living in that location, it's something that you may potentially want to explore. If we look at the lowest annual percentage change, that was in Aberdeenshire, where average house prices decreased actually by 2.4% in the 12 months to February 2025. And the average house price there is now £196,000. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Obviously, that's 1 month snapshot, but if you've been following this, you can see that there's been slight improvements month on month. So it is something for you to kind of keep an eye on. It doesn't show a trend at the moment, but actually we have seen month on month improvement since I've been doing this back in December. So again, that's over a quarter now. So definitely positive signs are coming through. But I'm going to just share some of the highlighted stats on that for you, because obviously me talking, it's a lot of information. Sometimes people like to see that in visuals, don't they? So let me just share that with you. So the headline statistics for February, as I mentioned earlier. So if we look at that, it's showing the average house price for Scotland was £186,000. You can see that there. The annual price change of a property in Scotland rose by 5.7%. The monthly price change of a property in Scotland was minus 1.5%. But overall, across the index figures for January 23 to present, it's 106.2%. So obviously this will vary in different areas depending on where you are. You saw that in East Renfrewshire, 10% increase. But as we go through this, I will cover with you in your particular location what really that impact means to you. So that's a really interesting stat to get you a good idea of the complete picture. When we look at that in regards to actual visibility on the annual price change, we can definitely see a flow there. Let me just get that for you 1 second. I'm just going to share that with you. I'll just get these other stats up to give you a wee look at these, because it's really interesting for you to see that. We're having some problems with that. Give me 1 wee second. I'm not sure why that's not working for us. Here we go, that's it working for me now. Fantastic. So there you have it. So when you look at the annual price change, we're doing this really from February 21 up until the end of February 25. So you're getting that complete 4-year picture here. But as you can see, definitely there's issues with that in regards to the projections that you saw there. These projections obviously were post-COVID, so we totally know that there was a big impact there. Then we saw the Liz Truss impact, and it really depreciated in August 23. But we're starting to see through August 23, over that period into February 25, a steady increase, which is great. So it's showing you here where we're sitting at that average of just under that 6%. So again, really positive to see in that graphic as well, just to get a feel for how is it going, because there was a big plummet there, as you can see, and it's definitely stabled itself out. And then we saw that increase there, which is fantastic. And that makes a big difference in regards to what that impact might mean to you. Good to see that visibility like that as well. What we're going to do as well, though, is we're going to look at actually, well, what is the price that's selling in your area, and what does that mean for you as a person? So if we look at Dundee, for instance, so the city of Dundee, the average house price in February of last year was 134,831. February of this year, we have seen a slight decline in the city of Dundee. It's now 133,000, so not massively, but it is a decrease in 1%. If we look at the city of Edinburgh, that's massively increased as well, and actually is probably sitting around about the second, third highest. So the average price last year at this point was 271,000. It's now sitting at 293,000. So that's an increase year on year of 8.4%. So again, really big numbers there. And again, if you want the visuals on that, you can click on the link and you'll get all that information. If we look at Glasgow, for instance, that's had an increase of 6.8%. So that's gone from 171,000 up to 182,000. If we then look at, say, East Lothian is sitting at an increase from 244,000, an increase of 6.3%, up to 259,000. If we then look at Fife, for instance, Fife has seen a real jump. Last month, this was sitting around about 6%. This month, the average property from February 24 to February 25 in Fife, it's increased from 154,262 up to 170,361. So that's only about 16,000 down from the actual average across Scotland. But again, very affordable in Fife, when we talked about the fact that you work to 6 times salaries and the averages that I mentioned earlier on. So again, way under that. So that's a really strong position, a 10.4% increase in Fife. And we're definitely seeing that with the flow of property that's coming to the market. So that makes it really interesting if you're in this location and you're potentially thinking about a move. If we look at, say, North Lanarkshire, for instance, again, really positive numbers. They're sitting at 9.5% increase. So property there has increased from 120,000 to 132,000. So again, real good improvements there. And then what we're then going to look at is, well, what does that mean for you in regards to the average price? And perhaps you're sitting at the moment in a flat or masonette, you're maybe in a terrace, you're thinking of upsizing to a semi-detached, or you're perhaps in a semi-detached, your family's growing, you're thinking about moving to a detached property. What does that really mean for you in real terms and numbers? So we'll have a little look at that as well and give you a good feel for it. So when we look at the average prices in Scotland, so the average price overall, as I said earlier, is 185,870. It's increased from 175,000 in February of last year, and that's an improvement of 5.7%. But how does that split across the board in regards to property type? Because that's important for you to understand that. So flats and masonettes, as I mentioned earlier on, the average flat masonette at the moment is sitting at 130,628, and that's against a price previous year at 126,000. So that's an improvement of 3.5%. If we look at terrace properties, they have increased from 158,000 up to 170,000, as I mentioned earlier, and that's an improvement of 7.4%. So if you're sitting in a terrace at the moment, you've got great growth there in your property potentially. If we look at semi-detached properties, they have increased by 6.3%. So February of last year, they were sitting averagely 197,000. And today, on February of 2025, we're sitting at 209,771. Your detached is where you've got the highest number, not necessarily the highest percentage improvement, but you definitely have the highest pricing point for selling detached properties. So in February of 24, the average detached house was at £323,000. It's improved by 7.2%, and that is equating to £347,423 for an average detached property. Generally, what we are seeing is your detached properties as well. The majority of those are new build properties. Builders at the moment are generally building either detached properties or they're building semi-detached. They very rarely are building flats or masonettes or terraces. And so that's where you're seeing that price jump as well, because new build properties are far more expensive to build now than they used to be, because of all the ergonomics that they have to attend to in regards to fuel consumption, etc. And we'll cover that later on as well. So it just gives you a real feel for it. But what we also do, as well as looking at the pricing of a house, because it's not necessarily that the health of the market is decided on what the value of a house is. The health of the market really is determined around how many transactions happen. What I mean by that is transactions basically are keys handed over, money's in the bank, new owners have moved into the house. Because what we see is generally, out of the 100% properties that go to market, generally 82% of them will complete on average. There'll be various reasons for that. And that could be change of heart, it could be separations, it could be that they haven't found the buyer at the price that they anticipated. There could be many reasons why that's happened. But also some people are selling and then they're not rebuying because it could be a deceased estate. So that impacts the numbers as well. So when we look at transaction, it's really important for us to see what's transacting in your location, and that gives you a better insight to the health of it as well. So we're going to look at some of the numbers for that. So if we look at February of 24, say City of Dundee, for instance, the transactions in that particular time was 199. It's gone up to 208, so not much of an improvement. If we look at the City of Edinburgh, 823 of February 24. February of 25, that's jumped up to 900. So that's a 10% improvement. So that's a positive impact. If we look at the City of Glasgow, actually that's depreciated. So that was originally 798 and that's gone down to 756. So that's about a 3% decrease in transactions. If we then say, look at Fife, for instance, we're sitting at Fife where the transactions were 492, we're sitting at 481, so almost balanced out. But what we did see earlier in Fife was actually the price increase was higher. So that's a positive position. If we then look at, say, North Lanarkshire, 393 versus 373. So again, a little bit of a decrease in there as well. But that gives you good insight as to what potentially is happening in your locations if you're potentially thinking of moving. What we then look at is the volumes of sales overall in the whole of the year. So if we look at sales volumes in, say, December of 20, they were sitting at 11,148. So again, a strong position at the end of that December. It then started to decrease as we kind of came out of the COVID period again. That was down to 8,942 in December of 21. We go to December 22, it was sitting at 7,906. December 23, it was sitting at 7,227. And then December 24 was sitting at transactions of 7,462. So you can definitely see that it's starting to climb a little bit there. So it'll be interesting to see how that flows through. But the fact that we're seeing increases month on month is a very positive sign. I mentioned earlier on about new build properties and the transactions on those, and it's good for you to get an idea of what that looks like. So what we talk about in this section is basically what is a new build property selling, comparing that to an existing resold house. So someone's lived in it already, they're selling it again. So when we look at that, the average prices at the end of December 2024 for a new build property was sitting at 355,503, which was a monthly change improvement of 5.4%, which gave you an annual change actually of 29.4%, nearly 30% year on year. price increase on a new build property being built. And again, that's reflective when we looked at those detached property prices, isn't it? So that's really quite an interesting one if you're potentially thinking about a new build property. Compare that to an existing resold property. The annual change of those was a positive of 3%, and those are sitting at 171,631. It's nearly half, in fact, it's more than half of a new build property that's being built at the moment. So again, you can see where your value for money is versus new build versus pre-existing. So again, if you're thinking about property move, something for you really to consider there, isn't it, in regards to, do I go for new build or do I improve the existing home, perhaps go and get a more economically affordable property and make the new changes that you want to make? You would certainly be adding value to that as well. And then what we're looking at is, who's buying these houses? What do they look like and what are they spending on average? So buyer status is first-time buyers and former owner occupiers. So rebuyers versus first-time buyers is what we're going to look at. Your first-time buyer, the average price of a property that they spent money on in February of 25 was 151,853. That was a monthly change of minus 1.6%, but actually it was an annual improvement of 5%. So definitely first-time buyers are having to pay more. If we look at then former owner occupiers, so selling and buying again, their average price in February of 25 was 233,125, which was a monthly change of minus 1.5%. So very similar to your first time buyers, but the annual change was higher than your first time buyers. And that is an annual change at 6.1%. So they're paying 6% more now to basically sell and then buy something else. And we've seen that in those averages where they've jumped when we talked about what was the prices year on year. Where are they getting that money from? That's always a question that's a good one to ask as well, because as agents, we still get that question, oh, ideally I'd want a cash buyer. But I think it's important for you to understand, well, what does that look like as far as a cash buyer for you? When we've looked at the average price point that you're having to pay for a property, what is an average cash buyer versus a mortgage buyer spending? And that will give you a good indicator on average whether or not your cash buyer is out there, and you may need to rethink how you potentially look at the sale of your house. So if we look at the average price in February 25 and where the funds are coming from, your average cash buyer is spending £170,740 on a property. That's less than the average across Scotland, and certainly much less than some of those price points that we talked about as we went through the regions. So again, if you're sitting potentially in a property, say valued at 250,000 and you're holding out for that cash buyer, I'm not saying that they're not there, but your average cash buyer is only spending 170,000. So you may need to think two things. You may need to think, well, actually, do I need a cash buyer? Potentially, maybe I need to go and find someone that's got a mortgage or a property to sell, or am I being realistic in what my expectation is from the price of my property? Or do I hang out and, maybe time's on your side and you're not got a deadline for moving out, so you can actually wait for that non-average person to come along. So it's good for you to understand where they're coming from. So your average cash buyer is spending 170,000 on a property, whereas your average mortgage buyer is spending just shy of 194,000 on a property. So again, it's dependent on what your property value is and what you're looking for in regards to timeline and who that person is. You have to make that choice, I guess, for yourself. But it is important for you to understand all that information. If you find that there's something in there that was really beneficial to you, or you wanted more stats on it, as I say, the link is in this post. So please feel free to click on that. It'll give you all the stats. It'll give you the graphics behind the stats as well. Some of them I wasn't able to share there, but it'll give you really good insight to it. If you have any questions once you've had a look at that, absolutely feel free to message me here directly. Myself or the team can come back to you and give you some updates. If you're considering a move, again, if you're looking for some sound advice, reach out to a professional, get some good advice, whether that be financial advice, property value advice. It's always good to start with that point. And it's Perrie at Fife Properties TV. Thank you very much. Take care. Speak to you soon. Bye-bye.